Alright there folks, welcome to another Fishing Adventures Bite Size, and it's pole floats today. Now I've covered these before in the past where I've done a little bit about stems and bodies and tips and stuff like that, but I'm still getting tons and tons of questions about what pole float should I use, what should I be looking for, when do I use this float, why do I want to use that float, etc, etc. Now a lot of it is down to personal choice and what you feel comfortable with. And it's the same with everything in fishing. That's why fishing is so diverse. You'll find a float, you'll use it, you'll be really confident in using it, and you'll kind of stick with it. And I did that for a long time without really thinking too much about it. But I've kind of refined my approach now, and I've got 4 floats that I use, and these are in my box 99% of the time. There's the odd exception to the rule, but these are the ones that I use. Okay, now the first one is these, and that is a Chianti style carbon stem float with a 1mm tip, and these are by Jazz Floats. You'll hear me mention these a lot because I rate these highly. They're absolutely spot on for fishing through the water using light baits such as maggots and casters that take quite a while to fall through the water column. And these are great if you're targeting silvers or you want to find out roughly where those fish are initially. They're great. Carbon stem allows for a nice slow fall through that water column, and that fine little 1mm bristle is mega sensitive. It will pick up anything through that water column. But you need to get used to how the floats work. You need to get used to how they sit, how they settle, and you also need to get used to however you've shotted it, get used to those shot registering on that bristle, because that makes a massive difference as well. Because if you get used to that, you'll notice as soon as something doesn't look quite right, a fish could have intercepted that bait, it doesn't sit quite right, so you know there's a fish there you can strike. You've got to get to know your gear. That is key in fishing. It doesn't matter what you use. If you're confident in it and you know exactly what it does, use it. Do you know what I mean? There are no real hard and fast rules, but as I said, I'm just explaining what I use and why I use them. So they're for fishing through the water column, especially in winter, or silvers for summer. Okay, so next one up. Now these are quite controversial. It's a kind of a teardroppy shaped float. Okay, now these have got a wire stem, and these are some very old Mark Pollard floats, and these are fantastic. I use these a lot, especially if I'm fishing pellet on the deck or in that bottom foot of water, because these are incredibly stable. With it being a wire stem, it sits accurately straight away, and I know that if I fish this with a bulk, that bait is going to get there, it's going to stay nice and still where I want it through the session. And as I said, I've used these for years and years, and I know if a fish breathes near it, and I know basically because I can see it on the float. Again, these have got, it's a solid bristle, it's 1.5mm, a very sensitive float again, and with that body style I can fish it in the slightly deeper water, or if there's a bit of tow, a bit of wind, it's just a little bit more stable. So I've got a massive amount of confidence in them. Now the two that seem to confuse a lot of people are your mud line and your margin. It's the same thing, it's just at the different side of the lake. If you were sat on the far bank, that'd be your margin, wouldn't it? But you sat on this bank, so it becomes your mud line. Does that make sense? It's the same basically. If you imagine, like we did on the Q&A things, and I drew the picture, your lake beds, it's going to slope down, level out, slope up the other side. 90% of lakes do that, especially snake lakes. So you want floats that are quite similar. They're going to behave in certain ways, but there's a little difference that a lot of people kind of miss, and this is what I do. For the mud line, I'll use that. It's a dibber basically, and I use them for fishing shallow, for slapping as well. And the reason I use that is because if I'm fishing at 14 meters, that is a nice big visual spot for me to look at, because if I was trying to fish it with something like that that's 1mm, I ain't going to see it. There's just no way I'm going to be able to see that. My eyes are completely wrecked. But anyway, So that would be a dibber float, okay? It's just nice and small, solidly built, balsa wood body, and a nice thick, what is that actually on there? Nice thick carbon stem. And that is perfect because I can get it shotted, fish it in 8 or 9 inches, less, sometimes a little bit more, and it'll sit there. It's highly visual, and I know it will get knocked around a little bit, but it won't go under unless a fish takes that pellet. So get on those. Now for your margin swim near yourself, you're going to need something similar. I know that there's a lot of variation. A lot of people use different style floats, different body floats, different patterns, etc, etc. Again, it's fishing. Everyone does it differently, but these are the two that I use. One of them is the classic rugby ball type shape, and that is on a glass stem with a tiny little bristle. It's a 2mm bristle, nice and stable. And I got these because they're absolutely bomb-proof. They will take an absolute beating, especially in the margins. If you're fishing near snags and stuff like that, they'll get dragged through the lilies and everything, and they'll come out totally unscathed. Now the other version that I use is the diamond with a 3mm bristle, and I tend to use that one if I'm fishing bigger baits like 2 or 3 grains of corn. What else do I use it? Margin, corns, big burn, massive bunches of maggots and stuff like that, because that offers me just a little bit more stability. I've got a lot more confidence in that for big baits, but I'll use that one if I'm fishing like a single grain of corn and stuff like that. But again, it's personal choice. I've chopped and changed, I've used both, and they work brilliantly. They're just nice and stable, but I know because of the shape and the size, they're not going to go under unless a fish has picked up that bait. Now as we get closer to summer, and hopefully we'll get on the banks and start fishing matches again, I'll be able to run through these rigs during some live practices and live matches, etc. And I'll go through shotting patterns and stuff like that. Now with regards to shotting patterns, this is something, again, I get tons and tons of questions about, and it can seem daunting and it can seem really, really confusing at the time. But you've got to think, really, what bait are you using and how do you want to present it in the water? Case example, maggots fishing through the water. You don't want a bulk of shot, because that bulk of shot is going to get that bait plummeting down straight away, and you're going to miss potentially all the fish that are up in the water. So you want a really strung out shotting pattern. Now that could be a strung out, people string them out and they'll leave an inch gap between each shot. If you want to get the proper effect and you want your hook bait to look as natural as possible in and amongst your loose feed, you want it to fall at such a slow rate that the fish don't know the difference. And that is where really, really stringing them out, depending on what depth you've got, I would evenly space them from the top of your hook length to the bottom of your float. That is how I tend to shot mine, and it does work. But as I've said, you've got to get used to how that particular float works before you can bin it off after a session. The other shotting pattern, if I'm fishing hard pellets or big baits that I want to fish on the deck, I'll use a bulk shotting pattern. So I'd have a bulk of shot and maybe 1 dropper underneath, sometimes 2, depending on what I want to do with that hook bait. Now people, a question that does come up is just like, when the fish come off the bottom, what do I need to do? Well, if you think about it logically, the fish will only come off the bottom if your feeding is wrong. If you want them feeding on the deck, you need to be tapping in a little bit of bait. Not much, but just making sure it gets down on the deck, okay? If you want to get them coming up in the water, you need to feed little and often and just keep it in, because there's a constant flow of bait. So half the time it won't get to the bottom because the fish are going to come up and intercept it, then they're going to start sitting mid-water. If you keep feeding like that, they're going to come right up into the surface, and it's a killer method in summer when you want to get them shallow, and close in and shallow is the fastest way to catch. But you want to set the little traps, so you pour in a little bit of bait, put your pellet over the top. You want a nice stable wire stem float with a bulk shot to keep that hook bait in that pile of bait without it moving until you get a bite. And that is what you need to do. if you just spend like 5 or 10 minutes just thinking about the baits that you're using and how you want those baits presenting, it does become a lot clearer. Now, the other question I get asked is, how do I know where to put my shot on the line? Again, it depends how you want that bait presenting, but I do use a rig board. Okay, it's not one I've bought. I mean, they're what, 50 odd quid for the rig bait or something. I don't see the point. So I've cobbled this one up. Okay, I've got a bit in there that I can fasten my spool of line into. Got a peg at the end so I can put my loop on. I'll have my float on there, and the line there runs along the tape measure, and I know that I can get my shot in absolutely spot on. And some people may say, oh, it's a bit OCD, it's not necessary, but little things make a massive difference. And if your shot is all equally spaced perfectly on that line, and it's in that central slot as deep as it can go, and they're all in a uniform line, it will make a massive difference. Okay, but again, it's personal choice. Everyone does it differently, but that's the way I do it. It's the way I've really started to refine my fishing and really start thinking more about what I want to achieve. And basically that's to get as many fish out of the swim as I possibly can, but I want to do it in a way that I can control. So I'll look at my rigs, I'll look at my shotting pattern, but more importantly, I'll look at feeding. But again, it's, you know, you could fish the same peg 5 days on the trot and it'll fish differently every single day. So this is where your watercraft and your knowledge comes in. If you're going to get into matches and stuff like that, you want to fish a venue and fish it regular. Okay, there's no point fishing 20 different venues for one match each, because you're not going to get a pattern of how that fishery works. You need to stick to a venue, get on a few matches, practice, and just look at your gear. If something's not quite working, or someone next to you is bagging up, just after match, just go to them, or during the practice session, just go to them and just say, oh, what sort of rig are you using? What's your shotting pattern? 9 times out of 10 they'll tell you. If they don't tell you, it's because they're a complete knob. But you get that everywhere in every sport. So just ask questions. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I've gone off topic there a little bit, having a bit of a moan and stuff, but that's the way I approach it. Those are the floats I use. As I say, everyone's different. Everyone's got their own ideas, their own styles, their own way of fishing as well. And that's what makes fishing interesting. So if you've got any thoughts, comments, get them down below. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. Get me some more questions as well coming through the Facebook group. Email me as well. Thank you very much for watching. Hit that button down there. And if you've got some more time, check out these awesome videos here. Cheers.